Welcome to Finding Avalon, the podcast that amplifies disabled voices. I'm your host, Jenna, a disability inclusion advocate, communicator, and storyteller. This is a place where disabled folks correct the narrative by sharing authentic lived experiences. Join me as we explore life with disability through our lens, because representation matters. Welcome back to Finding Avalon. On this podcast, authentic disabled representation and leadership takes center stage, one story at a time. After all, nobody is better qualified to speak to the disabled experience than we are. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that as a host, I live and work here in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and we acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. On this episode, we've got our very first guest joining us, Canadian musician and activist Naomi Kavka. Naomi is a songwriter and multi-instrumentalist from Smithers, British Columbia. She's a classically trained cellist, vocalist, and guitar player with a daring indie rock sound that's known for being musically polished, lyrically visceral, and emotionally raw. Naomi's songs come from the unique perspective of a queer woman, a child of a refugee, and a resident on the precipice of the Canadian wilderness. Welcome, Naomi.
Hi, Jenna. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. I'm so glad to have you join me today. Naomi, I've known you for more than a decade, and I've watched you grow and do some incredibly dynamic and difficult things. And I couldn't think of a better person to start with.
Well, thank you. I'm just so thrilled to be here. I'm so proud of you for this podcast. This is amazing.
Well, thank you. First of all, for everyone listening, Finding Avalon's podcast theme music comes from Naomi herself. And at the end, I'll share a few more details about it. Thanks so much for supporting this project by sharing your talent and this song. And in fact, a lot of people have been commenting about how much they love the show's compelling music.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure to get to contribute.
So, Naomi, I thought we could start by talking about identity because that really frames the experiences you've had and your unique perspective on life. How does your own intersectional identity shape your experience in life, work, and your art as a person living with disability?
This is always the hardest part of talking to anybody, is having to describe yourself. And I struggle with this as a musician too, but I think the benchmarks of where I find my personality and where I center myself on is I'm a queer woman. I live in a remote area in northern Canada where I really identify with being out in the wilderness and connecting with the land. I'm somebody who lives with chronic pain. I have a lower back problem. I recently just found out that I have scoliosis, and that would have been great if my parents had been able to do something about that when I was younger. But now I live with pretty much daily back pain that I learned to manage. I also am the child of an immigrant from Czechoslovakia. So he was a refugee from the Soviet bloc who also was neurodivergent and had a lot of unresolved trauma that he really took out on our family. So I grew up living with somebody who had needed a lot of accommodations and didn't know necessarily how to ask for them. And now as an adult, I've been devoting a lot of time to kind of unpacking those parts of my life and, figuring out what makes me myself and where, those experiences end and where I begin and how those things are kind of integrated. So that's been a big part of my life lately.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. You have so much up close and personal experience with disability. It's not often that a person has a 360-degree view of what it's like to live with disability and also live with family members who may be neurodivergent or have disabilities. And also generational trauma is something that we are beginning to learn more and more about.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I have an older brother who was recently given an autism diagnosis, and my mom at various times has been a person with disability as well. During my childhood, she was in a car accident and had fibromyalgia. And, as she's going into older age, she's recently become diabetic. So, there's these constantly shifting roles that happen in the person's life with their family. And that hasn't slowed down as I've gone into my mid-30s.
Absolutely. Like I always tell people when I do my advocacy work that we can come by disability so many different ways. We could be born with a disability, we can become ill or get injured, we can have chronic pain from all of that. Mental health is another item. And then, we're trying to go through life as we're aging. If we're privileged enough to live a long life, then we're managing all of those things. So I really appreciate you sharing that, and especially knowing that people are coping with a lot of different kinds of pain and trying to go through their life in a meaningful
Mhm.
way and be there for each other. And so I'm so impressed that you're being so vulnerable and sharing that with us. And
Oh, thank you.
yeah.
And in terms of my own experience with neurodivergence as well, like I am a person with depression and general anxiety disorder, and I have
Mm.
spent a significant amount of time in the different health systems here in British Columbia, having been institutionalized in a psych ward after a suicide attempt and going through having to advocate so hard to try and get mental health supports to the point where I almost died, and then finally having those doors open, which is such an unfortunate thing. And the system is so difficult to break into. I shouldn't say break into, but
Mhm.
they make it feel like that. It feels like this sort
Yeah.
of like this thing that you have to bust into. You have to prove how disabled you
Yeah.
are all the time. And it's not just true with mental health, but like any facet of living as a person with disabilities, you're constantly having to prove how disabled you are.
And there's so many barriers and barricades. Really, it is like you're trying to break through, whether it's gender bias or
Hmm.
racial bias or just not being heard. And also,
Yeah.
you're coping with all kinds of conditions, trying to self advocate at the times that you're most vulnerable, and you might not have a
Yeah,
support person there. That's pretty frightening.
absolutely.
That's intense.
And then there's also this ableism bias too, where I was
Yes.
told by a social worker that I would have a hard time getting taken seriously in the mental health systems in BC because I was an able-bodied
Hmm.
and neurotypical passing woman. And they're like,
Yes.
"Oh, you have an uphill battle because like, you know." And then there was a heavy dose of sexism because he also said some like really inappropriate things about like, "Oh, but you're attractive, so people aren't going to take you seriously." And like it's
Oh,
like I'm a vulnerable person
yeah.
who's coming here for help at like
Yeah.
months, weeks out of a suicide attempt, and to
Yeah.
get that kind of treatment is so unacceptable.
There's so many layers there. Many times when I was much younger and I was unwell but being dismissed by doctors, I was constantly told, "You're a good-looking young person. You're too bright to be sick.
Mhm.
You are, you're probably just anxious, and you go on out and go on out and live because you've got everything going for you." But I'm autistic and I may have high intellect, but that doesn't mean my support needs are low, right? I have daily
Absolutely.
struggles. Yeah, nobody sees
Mhm.
it unless they're really close to you. And so if there's any mental health issues happening or any other kinds of situations that make you super vulnerable, when someone sees you, I've been told, "Oh, you present very well." I present well? Okay, so I dressed well, I look a certain way, so you think that
Yeah.
I'm not ill or that maybe I'm less deserving of care, and it sounds like that's kind of what you came up against.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, the doctor that you were speaking about literally sounds like he was taken out of Nothing Compares to You by Prince. I went to the doctor, you know what he said, "You better
Yeah,
go have fun no matter what you do." But he's a fool. Like, even Prince was talking about this, and, like,
yeah,
we see these barriers even to somebody like Prince, who also died of a drug overdose for dealing with chronic pain, because
mhm,
that was something that even, like, a super celebrity like them and an artistic genius couldn't get the
yeah.
support that he needed.
Yeah, that's right, and this is a reason why I started this podcast, so we could be normalizing these conversations and openly talking about the struggles that we have with disability, whether that is mental health, neurodivergence, chronic pain, all of those different things,
Yeah,
and
and how all those things also interlace, like, my back
absolutely.
pain and my anxiety are deeply connected.
Mhm.
And I have a lot of symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder, and those things also ramp up when you're feeling depressed and pain and depression and anxiety. And, there's so many comorbidities that
Yeah,
they're not really disentangleable. But then we have to see a different doctor for our mental health and then a different doctor for my back pain. And,
yeah.
as if these things they aren't holistic.
They're broken down into these silos, and so nobody's really looking at that bird's eye view, that big picture, and I feel like for me, I
Mhm.
went almost 20 years without getting diagnoses, and if someone had just looked and really kind of had a big picture view of what was happening instead of siphoning it out into go see this and go do that. And no one
Mhm.
is talking to each other and no one's actually looking at all of it as a collective. And that's where the gaps are, and that's where the barriers still exist, right?
And then all of the onus is put on you to go through all of those steps to get an accurate
Yeah.
diagnosis, which it should not be.
Especially at times when you're in a great deal of pain and distress and being so worried and not
Mhm.
really at the capacity that you might ideally be at when you're being a strong self advocate, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And the times when we need to be the biggest advocates for
Yeah.
ourselves are often when we're at our lowest.
So, Naomi, I also love that through your music, you're also a storyteller. Music is such a comfort, and people can feel seen, connected, and even motivated to take action. As an artist who's living with disability, how does your music help you talk about your personal experiences or share a message with others?
Music at its core to me is about communication. And I grew up in a home where I didn't always feel safe expressing myself. And the main creative outlet that I was encouraged in and actively like rewarded for was music. So through that, music feels like the safest form of communication for me, where I feel like I can talk about anything and express really freely, really um, complex and deep emotions. And especially through music, because words are really powerful, melodies are really powerful, chords are powerful, and the instruments, and all of those things together can transmit so much more than just words alone can for me. And that allows me to talk about some of the hardest experiences in my life. Like, I'm able to process a lot of trauma or speak about traumatic things and feel unself conscious about it. And to be able to sing through those things in a way that I don't think I could do simply through talking or simply through writing. And I think the hardest thing to kind of describe is like what I really hope for with music is when you hear my song for you to even feel a little bit of that same feeling that I was, and for that to be relatable, for you to hear that and say like, oh, I understand that feeling. I'm less alone having felt that.
I have known your music for a long time, and I remember the first time I heard you sing, I was really struck by how powerful it was, and I wasn't expecting it to hit me the way that it did. And I feel
Oh,
like I feel like there's this really visceral quality to expressing ourselves in whatever art form that we choose, right? And music is,
hmm,
I think, deeply affecting. And I know myself when I have heard your music 10 years ago, your music now, I really do feel you through that. And I love what you said that you're singing your way through processing emotions and going through the healing and from the trauma. So I think it's a
hmm,
beautiful thing.
thank you. And also a kind of a safe place to express emotions that we're told that we can't. Like
Yep.
as women, especially, like we're told that our anger is something that has to be suppressed, that it's always inappropriate, and to be able to play an angry guitar solo that makes somebody uncomfortable, that feels so powerful.
Absolutely. I know the very first chords that you had played and you just belted out this music. I had done remember we were doing a photo shoot and, you were in my
Mhm,
studio, and I think at the
mhm.
time, I think it was a mandolin you had in your
I
hands,
did
I
have a
believe.
mandolin. Yeah.
Yeah, and you but the way that you played it, it was quite forceful in that first moment, and then when you burst out singing, I remember just kinda sitting back being in awe going, wow, it's wonderful to hear a woman using that kind of force in a beautiful but very raw way, and it just really stuck with me even now. I think there's a lot of power in there.
Oh, well, thank you, Jenna. I will say, like, I feel the most comfortable and in my skin when I'm performing. Like,
Yeah.
I know that I can be myself in my professionally and also just personally, I can put myself out there in a way that I don't really know how otherwise, I think.
It's like your true form,
Yeah, yeah, I metamorphosize into
right? Yeah.
not this bookish nerd that plays Sudoku on her phone all day and really likes Dr. Mario.
Naomi, I wanted to talk with you about you live with chronic pain. So do I. I really relate. You're neurodivergent, myself as well. And you also have touched on mental health struggles. How does all of these things combined add to the complexity and the soul that's in your music?
Well, I think there's a few different facets to this because of my specific, let's say, spice of neurodivergence. I I have a tendency to really fixate on things, and that can be a little bit of a musical superpower. I will practice things, or I will really think through ideas for a very, very long time and be able to sort of develop them. Um, and given the wide variety of experiences that I've had in my life, it's been a lot of things that I've had to kind of untangle in my adulthood. And I think that those experiences sort of lend a lot of emotional depth that I can sort of draw from and try to relate to other people. And then also it allows for me to find like what are the musical comforts? What's the musical comfort food that I have that I can kind of dig into and then also use that to share with other people. And for me, being able to immerse myself in like different sort of like sonic worlds is it's the ultimate comfort, I think. It's where I feel like most myself. And I don't think I would have been able to carve out those things or appreciate them as much if I didn't know them as a comfort or like find it like music is sort of this thing that like I need to do. And I think that comes through in the music, hopefully. The feedback I've gotten makes me indicates that that it comes through.
Absolutely. I was just about to ask, like, how do you find that people respond to some of maybe your most raw pieces that you do, or the way that you show up at different times as a musician and artist?
I'm very lucky to have had some very powerful experiences as a performer. One that really stands out to me is a friend who I was playing at a music festival that I was not very excited about being at. I was there as a side musician with someone else and was playing a solo set, and the organizers were not treating the side musicians very nicely. And I did not expect to see a lot of friendly faces there, but a really dear friend was there who had just gone through a breakup. And she sat right in the front row and just bawled the entire time while I was playing my set. And and it felt really special. There wasn't that many people in the audience. It wasn't a really outstanding performance in any other way except that I knew I was connecting with my friend who was going through this and that they were connecting with the music and it was helping them really feel these feelings that they needed to kind of get through. And the the funniest thing about that experience is that felt so meaningful and had so much depth. And after I finished my set, I unplugged my guitar and like put my arm around her. And the sound guy came up to me and said, "Huh, you were actually really good." It's like, what did you expect?
Yeah, thanks, buddy.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah. It sounds like that was so cathartic for your friend to experience
Mhm.
your words and your music and your melodies in a way that really spoke deeply to her as well, right? In that moment.
Yeah. And it was a time when a lot of the songs I was singing at that time came from a really deep place of loneliness. And I know that she was experiencing that. And in that moment, I felt like we were both there together. And
Yeah.
it was like the nicest way I could, short of putting my arm around her, give her a really long hug.
Yeah.
But there's other experiences too of just like you were saying earlier, seeing a woman who presents so strong and like I have a big voice and I make very obnoxious sounds with a guitar. I love playing big loud guitar solos and making big sounds and um, a lot of men, like people in general, are not used to seeing that. Not used to seeing like somebody go on a stage and like, for lack of a better word, like go with the confidence that a man does. And that irks me to no end that I it's like, "Oh, I'm just going and doing what makes me feel comfortable."
Yeah.
But it is really inspiring when there's women who are like, "I've never seen a woman play guitar like that,"
Yeah.
or "I've never heard a woman sing like that," and that's really powerful to be able to share that and say like, "You can do this." Like, it's a space for us.
You're showing up unapologetically too, right? And that's super
Mhm.
empowering.
Yeah, absolutely. The there's a lot of apologies before getting on the stage, but
So, can I ask you about how you navigate making music and doing your creative projects when you might be in pain or sensory discomfort, or if your focus or your mood isn't quite there for the creative process?
That's a really great question because especially the last couple of years since COVID, trying to get back into touring, thankfully a lot of other artists have sort of been having this conversation about like what do we need to do to be successful in touring and taking care of ourselves, and what does self-care mean for a musician? Like for me, COVID lockdown was kind of a dream. I was so socially anxious.
Oh.
I had so little job security, and it's like I have a steady income and I just get to stay at home. This is amazing. And it gave me the space to really find out like what are my needs? And when sort of emerging back into touring and still making adjustments now, like I know better the comforts that I sort of need to maintain a sense of stability. So I make sure, especially on the road, that I make space for exercise and stretches. I always bring a yoga mat so that I can make sure my back is not going to be something that's going to give out, because I've had that happen on the road and it is very difficult. I in April I will be celebrating 4 years of sobriety,
Wow.
uh, which is
Congratulations.
thank you. That was something, 4 5 years ago I never would have known was possible. I never would have thought of being a touring artist and not having the crutch of alcohol, which allowed me to be social when I wasn't feeling social and, you know, push through uh, a lot of, maybe working with people who were very unkind or not
Mhm.
understanding, and getting through a lot of situations that now I am able to sort of take a step back and be like, this pushes my comfort, so I'm going to step away from this. And for me, that's as simple as like at a festival, I ask them to give me accommodations that aren't on the festival grounds. If I don't have to be in that space all the time, and even in those situations, I have a tent set up so I can like go and just be by myself,
Yeah,
and
have
making
that
carving out
quiet
those little
space.
spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And there's still a lot of like complex emotions and things that go on in the logistics. Like our job as artists is so difficult because we have to. I'm not just a music maker. I'm also somebody who has to do all of my own promotion, and I'm fortunate now that I'm assembling more of a team to help with that as well, which has been a real gift. Like I have a booking agent now. Booking used to be like my deepest source of anxiety because of just rejection is so hard. Um, and like coping with those things, and doing that on top of like
Yeah.
having to like really show up for a performance, or you drive 8 hours and then have to do your load in and do all those things. Like finding a balance there is really important. And I think for me, like excusing myself and just giving myself space. And the hardest thing I think has been learning when to ask for help. So,
Yes.
asking for those accommodations and those sort of things can be sort of the hardest step. But I've had to cope with physical pain while performing, and it's really tough. But you might relate a little bit with the neurodivergent habit of a lot of people where you don't notice you're in discomfort till suddenly your concentration is broken. So it's like
You
you're
don't
in that
know how
hyper
bad it
focus.
is. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
focusing and all of your senses are kind of dulled. You don't realize you're in pain. You don't realize you're hungry. You don't realize you might be triggered or uncomfortable or super
Yeah.
anxious and
Yeah,
about to,
absolutely.
melt down, right?
The classic one for me is I don't like I'll be interested in something, like say I'm fiddling with guitar pedals, so I'm sitting cross-legged on the ground, and like an hour or two goes by and then I'm like, my back is so sore.
What is going on with my body?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so trying to be taking a little bit of space to sort of be aware of what my body is telling me, because I think like a lot of women and a lot of people with neurodivergence, you learn to ignore those things for the sake of other people's comfort. And I'm slowly unlearning that, and I'm slowly learning to be less of a tough guy. So,
Yeah.
the keyboard player and the bass player in my band are angels, and, like, when my back is acting up, they help me move equipment, and,
Yeah.
like, we take care of each other, but it took a lot of work to first be able to find the kind of people that would do that,
Yes.
like, build those trusting relationships that you can feel supported and then feel safe enough to ask for the help.
Absolutely, because, that's what you're talking about feels like a bit of internalized ableism. We're always told to like stiff up our lip, just
Mhm.
tough it out. You should be able to do this, just push through, mind over
Yep.
matter, all of that. And that's quite damaging because then you end up doing all of these things that physically or mentally or emotionally you really don't need to be doing if you can reach out for that help.
Absolutely. And then the added pressure being like the front person of a band is if I don't do it, nobody else will.
Right. You're
So
the
there's
leader.
there's this like this level. And then the keyboard player in my band, Ian, is always saying, we're a band. Remember, we're a band. Like he's always giving that reminder of like we're all in this together.
Yeah, it's super important to be able to ask for help, but recognize that you need that help, ask for it, but also be in a safe enough, supportive space where there are people who are allies and
Yeah,
helpers, friends, colleagues who are going to help you, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Naomi, can you tell me a little bit more about your journey and this revelation that you had about the power of self compassion?
I think my relationship with compassion was really long fought. Because I was taught from a very early age to have compassion, in particular with the complex men in my life. So feeling
Mhm.
compassion towards my dad, and then eventually feeling compassion towards my partners who were very much like my dad. um, and it took a long time to be able to find that kind of kindness or patience with myself. Um, and I think the beginning of that for me really was when I quit drinking, because I was so hard on myself for my addiction to alcohol and the amount that I needed it. Sometimes that was the only thing that was getting me out the door. Um, and what I didn't realize at the time is that I was self-medicating. I
Yeah.
was using this as a tool to help dull a lot of the other pains, physical and psychological pains that I didn't have the tools to cope with at that time. And then it led to this sort of guilt spiral of like, oh well, you deserve this. And if you were stronger, you wouldn't have to drink. And these sort of things. And that's such a dangerous cycle to beat yourself up about. And I think for myself, it was, I mean, I had a health emergency that was a big shakeup for me, where I was like, I have to stop drinking or I'm going to die. And then that was the moment where I was like, yeah, I don't want to die. I want to have this life. I want to make the most of it. And I was able to look at myself in that moment and say, you were doing the best that you could with the tools that you had. And you're working to get a better toolkit. You're working to find these other ways of being. And you don't need the alcohol. And don't be mad at yourself for having needed it. That was what got you here. That's what kept you until this moment. And then you were able
Yes.
to, and it didn't, the struggle didn't end there, but it did open up a lot of doors of being able to, when I would have moments where like, oh, that was a trigger, like I would normally have a drink right now, and I would say like, that's okay. You're still untangling, like you're unlearning a lot of habits and all of these things. And like through that, I was able to begin understanding self-compassion. And it's something that I still actively work on. It's not like I'm constantly the most stoked with myself all the time. Like I still make mistakes and beat myself up, but
Yeah.
I try to actively treat myself. And this is something that I've been talking about with my psychiatrist quite a bit, is that there is a child in me still. There's like the little girl that wasn't getting given all of her needs when I was growing up. And I try to, when I'm doing my best with self-care and self-compassion, is I'm trying to give that child what she needs. And it can be really hard to do that directly if you're thinking about giving yourself something, that can feel kind of selfish. I'm actually working on a song right now that I'm writing from the perspective of talking to a little sister that I've never had. And really, I'm trying to talk to myself. I'm trying to give the advice that I wish I could have given a younger version of myself, and give that grace that I haven't always been able to. And it feels a little easier to transmute those ideas, through a dialogue to somebody else as opposed to myself.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I feel like society and family and all of those things often overlook the needs of little girls who become
Mhm.
teenagers, who become young women, who become older women, who are taught to prioritize everyone else until they've run themselves completely into the ground.
Mhm. And we spend so much of our lives building up these barriers around that little person.
Yes.
That, all these habits that we have and, the things that we wind up unlearning as adults were all the things that you learned that got you through your childhood or
Yeah.
got you through a traumatic thing or like got you through, I've some of my closest friends spent decades being like homeless and living on trains, train hopping. And when they've been trying to adapt to having, a more stable life where they stay in one place and they they're still so shattered by like housing insecurity or those threats to their well-being that were such a reality when that they were living a more transient lifestyle
Yeah.
that it's hard for them to even feel safe and comfortable when they've made a safe comfortable place for themselves. And I think there's a little bit of that in kind of everybody. Like I've struggled the last couple of years with my new partner trusting that he's safe because my experiences with so many relationships were so unsafe. And he's so patient and so kind, but, like, that's been a lot of work for me to just sort of like, "Oh, okay. I can I can relax a little bit."
Yeah, because trauma gets down to almost like that molecular level. It's almost in your
Mhm.
blood, and it's very hard to unlearn it and expunge it in some way, so that you can make
Yeah,
space for recognizing and actually acknowledging and feeling that there is actual safety.
absolutely, yeah. And I think the other thing that in the same line of self-compassion too is quite often I don't actually know how to identify what my needs are. Like I it's like,
Yeah,
do I wanna be alone right now, or is that because I don't wanna make someone else uncomfortable? Or,
right.
like,
Because it's the
where
conditioning,
exactly, like,
a
where does the
lifetime of it.
conditioning end? Yeah, like, I don't I it's hard to disentangle, like, where do those conditioned elements of me end and my own personality actually begin, and is there a way to disentangle that? And, how much
Yeah.
mental energy do I need to spend on that?
Yeah, because you've got the caretaking, you've got the people pleasing, you've got the habits of what you know has kept you safe in certain situations, and it can be hard to
Mhm.
recognize that. Yeah.
And I think the hardest thing, but the most important thing is just going easy on yourself. There's this, um there's this sort of notion called the Solomon paradox, and it's about King Solomon, who was great at giving advice. He was so wise, people traveled far and wide to get advice from him. But if you looked at his life, he was kind of a philandering, he made a lot of choices that seemed a little questionable. And I think the Solomon's paradox is that we're all really good at giving advice, but we're not good at giving ourselves advice. So thinking about just the recontextualization of like, if one of your closest friends came up to you expressing the feelings that you're having or the experience you're having, how would you talk to them? And what advice would you give them and extend that onto yourself? Like it just as a mental exercise. Like if you had a friend who was coming up to you saying like, "Oh, I'm no good at anything that I do," and you know that they're a really talented and kind and capable person, and then just flip that narrative, like flip the lens, and it's like you talking to yourself. You are all of those things, and be able to have that kind dialogue with yourself and stop the negative self-talk as much as you can, like get out of the habit of that. And that's one small step that you can take, but I think just having that lens, that perspective shift of like you are just another human being just like anybody else who deserves that compassion and who deserves the patience and the encouragement that you would give anybody else that you care about.
I love that, and I kind of think that self-compassion can help us move towards self-acceptance. What kind of, ways can we do that?
I don't want to say I'm having an identity crisis, but the last 2 years of going through a lot of like I've been really lucky to have psychoanalytic talk therapy, and that has really helped me raise more awareness about like how I am as an adult and how that was shaped by my childhood and the role models that I had, and trying to figure out like who am I in all of that. Like,
Yes.
like we're a combination of all of our experiences, and but there's also like trying to find that part of me that's like there is a part that's kind of always been there through all of this, and that can be so difficult to untangle from everything else, like all of the experiences and all of the reactions that you've had to them and the relationships that have come and gone. And for me, I think a lot of self actualizing has been realizing the comforts that I wish I could have been given when I was a kid. And that allows me to have the space more to be a little bit more daring with being creative, or more daring socially in terms of like, putting myself out there in different ways. I moved to a new community recently, and that was a really exciting thing. But also with my social anxiety, it was, a little bit scary. And, and for me, like, I still go back to a lot of those childhood comforts of like, if I'm overwhelmed, I'm going to play video games and eat candy. and, and I can do that mostly without too much shame. It's like, no, this is just really what I feel like I need right now. Like, I'm going to do this
Yeah.
for a few hours and I'll feel way better. Or spending time outside, or, like everybody has their own things, but like finding those coping mechanisms that allow you to really feel like yourself, as opposed to the coping mechanisms I was using before, like alcohol, which made me think I was feeling like myself, but it was just, kind of just quieting all the other voices and like all the anxieties and stuff. Um, Yeah, so I think that that's one step in that, is because when you find those comforts, you're able to feel safe, and I think when you're safe, you're able to kind of be your most true version of yourself, where you're not stressed. You're able to think about the future. You're able to think about the things that you really want to do, and that's such a difficult thing to do when you're in pain and when you're feeling alienated or when you're feeling isolated. And if you can build that little sense of safety in yourself, that's the most powerful place I think you can have it, if you are so lucky to be able to do that.
Thank you so much for being so forthright about this. When you're healing and living life on your own terms, that is, I think, the truest you can be to yourself. And it is not an easy road. What
Mhm.
you've just shared with us, this is not an easy road. I know people who are listening will be able to relate to what you're saying here. And thank you for sharing that and, being that vulnerable with us. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, I'm so lucky to be able to have a platform to get to share these things. I really appreciate it. As women, and as I mentioned earlier, how we're so conditioned to think about the comforts of other people, um, I a big part of, I think, my self compassion as well lately has been, thinking about like I grew up in a pressure cooker, and I developed all these skills and means of survival, and those things came from, having to adapt to living with a very abusive and unwell father who I loved really deeply. Um, but being able to acknowledge that like these things that I picked up were not my fault, and the way that I was treated by him was not fair, and it was completely unacceptable that the way he treated his family in his worst moments. But he also came from a war-torn country. He was also a person with disability, but that wasn't recognized then where he was living. And he adapted in the same ways that I was having to adapt as a child. And then he passed those things on to me, as we're talking about intergenerational trauma. But I can be ambivalent, and I think ambivalence is a really powerful feeling that, much like stoicism can be a tool in cognitive behavioral therapy, being able to feel more than one way about a situation. I feel deep love for my dad, but I also can feel angry to him. And through that, I can feel compassion for what he suffered that made him feel he was comfortable and allowed to treat his family in the way that he was treating us, because he didn't have the tools that I have now been lucky enough to receive. And if I can extend that compassion towards somebody like him, then I deserve that kind of compassion too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for sharing that.
And that level of compassion allows me to do the self-exploration that I need to do to find what actually really brings me joy and really makes me feel fulfilled as a person.
So, Naomi, we've talked about a lot of different things, but could I ask you, what is a common misconception about disability that you've noticed, and how would you reframe it to correct the narrative?
Oh boy. For me, it's the notion that you have to perform how debilitated you are in order to be
Hmm.
recognized as somebody who is a person with disability. Like, I think a good comparison is like how difficult it is to go through the PWD applications versus how easy it was for everybody to get CERB when, like that we have to prove our disability so much. And being being a person who's not able to function should be treated as an emergency in the same way that like when we weren't allowed to go to work and needed that support. I find it really insulting that like, you have, especially when you're at your most vulnerable and need the most support, you're expected to fill out so much paperwork and to go to all of these specialists and have so many experts help you send in this application that will very likely get rejected. So that whole notion that like that system is a handout
Yeah.
and that it's such a pittance, nobody can survive off of that. So I think that that's a big misconception that like, and there's a reason a lot of, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just thinking that process itself is full of barriers. It's so inaccessible, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and that's by design. It's by design to be inaccessible. They don't want people accessing the things that they deserve to access in order to be able to live in our country. Yeah, so I think that that's a really big misconception. And a
Yes.
lot of persons with disability, they work their butts off. They work
Yeah.
at jobs that cause them pain and cause them emotional distress and just to make ends meet because you have to be at this breaking point to be able to actually qualify for the funding. So if I could, rattle any cages about that, and I just want anybody who's going through that process, who has been through that process, like, I am so sorry. It is a doozy and uh, it needs to change.
I like what you said about the performance of disability. People are expecting an explanation or performance of, are
Mhm.
you disabled? Well, if you are, how disabled are you? And
Yeah,
how many hoops are you going to jump through to prove it? And it can be so demeaning, right? To go through that process and still get declined, still get
absolutely.
rejected, and not be supported, even though you have kind of bared your whole soul and run yourself ragged to prove that you deserve that support as a disabled person.
Yeah.
For the Finding Avalon playlist that I've created, what's a song or two that you enjoy that speaks to your experience or your thoughts on disability?
I'm so glad you said 2 because I have 2 songs. So, the first song I would like to recommend, is from an artist from Hamilton named Wax Mannequin. Wax Mannequin is a neurodivergent songwriter who just released an amazing album called The Red Rain, which I was really lucky to get to play cello on. But I'm recommending an old song of his, called "Tell the Doctor." And "Tell the Doctor" is, to me, it's about screaming for help from these authorities that will, you know, you're asking to be recognized and you're relying on these authority figures to be able to give you that help. And you're sort of at their mercy. And the the opening line is, "You've got to tell the doctor to believe me. He'll make it real. He'll make it real." And to me, that speaks so much to the experience of like so many people with chronic pain, so many women who have been, told that their pain isn't real and denied healthcare and died and, you know,
Yeah.
put in these situations. And to have this guy, it like also the song just kicks ass. Like it's so
Okay.
it's just such a good rock and roll song. And I remember listening to it when I was going through a lot of my experiences with the medical system and just crying because it's like he gets it. And so that song is just amazing and beautiful. And it also has I think that might be the one with the meow solo. A lot of Wax Mannequin songs, he'll start meowing in the middle of the songs. It's so good. And the other song I would really like to recommend is from an artist named Ray Spoon. Ray is one of my heroes musically and also just as a human being. Ray is amazing. They're an amazing artist and songwriter and activist. They've really spent their career trying to amplify voices of trans and queer voices, disabled voices, challenging things like fat phobia and racism. And the song I want to recommend is called Seascape. And the chorus of this song really hit me. I remember hearing it at a conference where I was having a really rough time and Ray happened to be there. And this was also like kind of in sort of around the depths of my alcoholism. And the chorus of the song just goes, "Whatever keeps you breathing." And it struck me so much in that moment, especially with with our theme of self-compassion and like if you're coping through things, whatever your comfort is, like if that's what's keeping you going right now, like don't be hard on yourself. Like whatever keeps you breathing. And it's just a beautiful song. And Ray is a beautiful person. And they also have an amazing album called Mental Health. It's fantastic. And Ray recently had a really intense medical journey and almost died, and has released an album. I think just celebrating that they're still alive. And
Amazing.
just really inspirational stuff. And Ray is just an absolute gem in Canada and in the music community here. So I'm so happy to get to recommend their music.
Oh, nice. I love a music recommendation. I'm going to make sure that I'm adding that to the Finding Avalon playlist for season 1. I've kind of created that as a companion to this podcast because I'm a real music lover. I'm not musical, but I love music. For those people who are listening and who love to discover new music, the Finding Avalon playlist is going to feature songs that are inspired by the podcast themes, the overall vibes, and guests just like Naomi who have excellent taste and excellent recommendations. So just check it out on Spotify. So, Naomi, in 3 simple words, what does disability inclusion mean to you? Like, for example, it could be 3 separate words or a 3 word phrase. Like, what comes up for me immediately, what comes to mind is listen to us or no unsolicited advice.
Yeah.
What kind of words come up for you when you're thinking about disability inclusion?
Well, I think especially if I'm were to talk to somebody who is like able-bodied or does not experience disability, the 3 words are disability is stressful. Like it's so it's if you're like an able-bodied and neurotypical person, like think about your most stressful day and how you have this limited capacity to sort of like, you might be a little short with people. You're not batting at 100%. You're not the best version of yourself in those moments. And imagine that being your whole life all the time. And you have to practice being this best version of yourself all the time around other people. So, give a little space if you know that somebody is a person with disability, even if it's a disability that isn't visible or one that you don't understand. Just come from that perspective of like, this person puts up with a lot of things and I don't need to add to
Absolutely.
that stress. Yeah, give a
No.
little bit of a wider, give a wide buffer. Yeah, so just anything that I can do to just make people be a bit nicer to each other, have a little bit more
Uh,
understanding. So I think if that's a message I can sort of get across, just to give a little bit more forgiveness and a little bit more understanding.
we definitely need more of that. Thank you so much. That's a wonderful way of looking at it. And my last question for you, Naomi, you've been so generous with your time. The last question that I have for you is what would you tell your younger self if you could go back and share some wisdom or guidance?
Try to keep a soft heart. That's the line in the song that I've been kind of working on is like, don't let yourself get hardened by things. But also, be careful. Like you're not a bottomless well. You're not, don't let other people take too much from you or don't give too much of yourself. But like don't become hardened. Try to keep that softness.
I love that, and I can't wait to hear this song once it's ready. I'm gonna be
Oh,
lining up waiting to hear it because I know there's gonna be a lot of feels in there, and, thank you so much for that. I wanted to thank you for spending time with us today. I love that we started things off with representing disability from East Coast to West Coast with the very first guest episode. So, Naomi, I really wanna Thank you for sharing so candidly about your journey and the ways that you're making change. You've got so much talent, so much vision, and I think everyone should know about it. So before we sign off, I'd love to turn it over to you to share a little bit about what you've got going on.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Jenna. And I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to get to talk to somebody that I've known for so long and can trust and feel open talking to about these things. Right now, I'm actually at an artist residency in the Similkameen Valley in the South Okanagan in British Columbia. I've been here for the last month doing songwriting, and I'm looking forward to continuing writing these songs and hopefully putting them towards a new album in the next year or two. I just released an album in June of last year, so I'm still also promoting that. If any of your listeners are into records, I have records available, but you can also find all of my music online on Bandcamp, Spotify, all of the streaming overlords of choice. You can find it anywhere there. And you can follow me on Instagram. That's the main social media. I've got a almost weekly newsletter I do on my channel on Instagram. It's Naomi_Kavka, and I post sometimes pictures of my cute cat and my cute dog and all the music stuff I'm doing.
Thank you so much, Naomi. I'm going to ask everybody listening to check out Finding Avalon's blog and Instagram to learn more about Naomi. I'll be tagging her there, and so you can learn more about her and support her projects. Thanks again, Naomi, for sharing your story and showing us what authentic disabled representation looks like.
Well, thank you so much, Jenna, and thank you for doing this. It's so wonderful to know that you're out there showing this kind of leadership and helping elevate these voices.
Oh, I appreciate it, and thank you for being my very first guest. On our next episode, healthcare professional Fernan Fedren will be our featured guest all the way from Mexico City. We'll be talking about his experience with disability as a queer neurodivergent man and his passion for helping patients. We'll also examine the ableism behind fat phobia, as well as navigating medical school with ADHD. Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to follow the Finding Avalon podcast and share this episode with others you think it might resonate with. Special artist thanks and credit for the unreleased feature song Coal Miner, written by Steve Hoskins, arranged by Naomi Kavka, and performed by Naomi Kavka, Bryn Porter, and Tony Kostelik. Thanks again, everyone, and see you next time.